At this point, I'll turn over to Chief of Police Dean Smith.
Good evening, council members. Thank you for allowing us to speak with you about the work that's been completed related to the city's strategic plan and developing our key performance indicators. I'll quickly give you a brief overview of what we'll be covering tonight. As you notice on the agenda, we're going to talk briefly about the committee makeup, the history of strategic planning here within the city of Oshkosh, our key performance indicators, development process, department goals, performance management system through the Invisio software, as well as the next steps moving forward. Now, the committee was originally led by retired Fire Chief Tim Franz and I. Staff members were identified as up-and-coming leaders within the city. We felt strongly that it would be good to expose them to the strategic planning process for the whole city. With me tonight, I have some of the members of the committee. We have Kelly Nyforth from Community Development, who's not here. Ryan Lemke from Public Works, who's here. We also have Chad Dahlman from Parks, Emily Springstra, Tori Heidemann from the Police Department, she's my crime analyst, and of course Courtney Jenks from Administrative Services. Project resources were developed by the Assistant City Manager John Fitzpatrick and of course Walter Janikowski with the strategic plan. To touch briefly on our history of strategic planning here in the city, between 2012 and 2016, our strategic plan was previously created, but performance measures were underutilized by departments. Between 2017 and 2018, the city's operating budget was tied to the strategic plan. We began using Invisio software to track the data. Initiatives were reported out on a quarterly basis. The strategic plan was used to guide departments' day-to-day initiatives, and city departments began developing key performance indicators. Beginning in 2019 and moving forward, we'll begin creating public dashboards for the community to visualize what the city's accomplishing in relation to the strategic plan. We will continue to use the plan as a guide for departments' day-to-day activities. Our KPIs will be assessed and updated on a regular basis. Our KPIs will help formulate future strategies, including budget prioritization. Now let's talk a little bit briefly about KPIs. When setting strategic goals for our city, key performance indicators and SMART goals needed to go hand in hand. Our KPIs will strive to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, as well as time-bound. So we're going to talk about the development process, and this was it's been a long journey. It's taken some education. It's taken some meetings where we've spent a lot of hours sitting, talking about the strategic plan as it was developed, as well as how we're going to move the whole city into developing KPIs. So the committee was formed in late 2017 and early 2018. The full committee met as a committee 3 times. Committee members split into groups of 3 and met with department heads one-on-one to assist with KPI identification and finalization. There were several meetings that occurred with department heads and team leaders to clearly define what KPIs should look like for the city of Oshkosh. KPIs were developed based on the department's contribution to the city's strategic plan. Through this process, many departments found they were already collecting data specific to the city's strategic plan. And later on in the presentation, you'll see some of those data points that we were discussing. Departments were encouraged to develop both internal and external KPIs to identify daily work related to the strategic plan and highlight initiatives or KPIs important to the community. There were a total of 24 meetings with department staff that occurred throughout the year. Now moving forward, departments will have both internal and public-facing dashboards. These were developed by the department heads. The following slides are highlights of the department KPIs that will be on the public-facing dashboards. And again, I want to clarify, there's internal performance measures, but there's also our KPIs, our key performance indicators that we want to push out to the public. Certainly we're not demonstrating all of the things that we're tracking because it would really become a large presentation to the community and they'd probably get lost. But these are important key performance indicators.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, there are so many different performance indicators, but council had talked about through strategic planning some of the what are key? What are things that are important to you in terms of you telling a story with the public, as well as relevant for the department? So even though these are the KPIs, they're really just the tip of an iceberg of a lot of different performance indicators that are at the department's disposal and at your disposal as well to take a look at. But these are the ones we think that will be very relevant to the public.
And I'd also want to note that we're really beginning with the baseline for many of the departments on tracking our performance indicators. And these will be tools for us to use in coming years to really establish what we're doing as a city and as departments. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are we staying the same? Or do we need to modify and change our key performance indicators? So we'll go through the departments so you get an idea of what the public will be looking at. We'll start with the police department. For the police department, our key performance indicators on our public-facing dashboard will be number of citizen community presentations given. As an agency, our primary job certainly, we believe strongly in our team policing philosophy, and this is one of the areas that we exhibit this on a regular basis through our community presentations. Percent of Part 1 UCR, Uniform Crime Report offense data, increase or decrease compared to the previous year. Number of crisis intervention team trained staff, and number of drug-related investigations by the Vice and Narcotics Unit. Fire Department KPIs. Provide an initial responding unit to emergencies that present an immediate threat to life or property in less than 6 minutes, 90% of the time. Increase the confinement of structure fires to the floor of origin by 5% year to year. Participate in 90% of the requests for public education and outreach. Administrative services through IT. Implement all 20 Tyler Technologies Munis Enterprise Resource Planning Software Suite modules by 2020. Percent of time network resources are available. Number of end-user computer device failures versus designated replacement schedule. Human resources, percent turnover of city staff. Percent of diversity within the city staff. And quarterly vacancy rates. General services, Oshkosh Media. Percent of time GovTV live government meetings are successfully televised on cable and online. Average weekly users reached by Oshkosh Media's Facebook page. Facilities maintenance. Percent of time general services buildings are functional during scheduled business hours for the public and employees. Average time to resolve reported maintenance issues within general services managed buildings through purchasing. Annual cost savings derived from the procurement function. The city clerk and city attorney. Percent of Wisconsin Election Commission ward reports submitted within 30 days of election. Percent of minutes completed Friday prior to council meeting. Percent of annual license renewals completed by July. Percent of assessments balanced monthly with accounting. Percent of phone counter inquiries handled at initial contact with customers. Under the city attorney, prosecutions, number of initial appearances, pre-trials, trials, and appeals. Number of nuisance abatement actions, number of items prepared or reviewed for council agenda. Library KPIs, percent of people served who are registered library card holders. Percent of people served who are active users. Percent of service population who registered for a new library card. Library visits per capita. Program attendance per 1,000 of the service population. Museum, number of website visits. Number of social media followers. Annual attendance continuing to increase based on a 3-year average by a percent, which is going to be established following 2018. Brad felt it was important to get his baseline number in 2018 in order to develop that percentage moving forward. Increase the number of records and images in the database by a percentage annually. Number of people using virtual exhibitions and internet-based collections remaining steady or expanding. Streets. Percent of sanitary sewer system inspected. Percent of storm sewer system inspected. Time it takes to resolve 90% of reported sewer blockages. Percent of potholes proactively repaired versus reactively repaired. The median pacer rating of all streets.
I like that one.
Sanitation. Tons of refuse collected. Tons of recycling collected. Percent of collected materials landfilled versus recycled. Percent of sanitation routes completed within normal working hours. Central garage, percent of repairs that are scheduled versus not scheduled. Percent of time the fleet vehicles are available when needed. Percent of time the fueling.
And obviously, county doesn't match up with city, but it seems to me that their measuring is a little more outcome results oriented, where I noticed that some of our measurements that were referred to in the highlights were more, for example, with police, the number of people trained, for example, in the crisis intervention versus maybe, you know, here, let's say this was a relational customers receiving case management services that achieved stabilization. So I guess my question is, when we talk about measuring based on the number of people we've trained, it doesn't necessarily reflect the number of responses or deployment or cases that involved that product, if you will. Mm-hmm. Similarly with transit, we had some that were relating to the delivery of the service, but let's say, for example, the percent of dwelling units within a quarter mile of a bus stop. I guess dwelling units may not necessarily be under the realm of transit, but the stops are, so I kind of get that. But what I'm saying is, you know, are we looking at refining this to be a little more results and outcome driven as opposed to here's what we have? And
I think what you'll see is as we progress and we grow, as we mature in this process, you'll start to see, and part of our next steps is benchmarking. So we're going to be looking at how we compare to ourselves first, year to year or quarter to quarter, and then how do we compare to other like communities along the way. We're infants in this. Sure. But we're growing, and it's going to just take a little bit of time for the departments to grow into this process. But to your point, yeah, we're going to see the data become relational based upon what's occurred in the past.
You know, I'm thinking like, you know, with Parks Department, we've mentioned on a number of occasions, and the Parks Department has indicated that, as well as the museum, you know, tracking attendance and use of the parks, you know, would be kind of a natural measurement, if you will. You know, the number of donations, grants, and sponsorships, that's great. Tracking volunteers is great, but the delivery of service really seems to me to be more about the use of those facilities. So I'm just kind of interested to see how that develops as you guys go further.
Yeah, they do track attendance.
They're tracking attendance, though. It's number of participants at Parks Department sponsored events.
Events, but not necessarily facility use. And I think Ray had mentioned that they had some counter issues with, like, for example, the zoo.
Right.
You know, so they're aware of it.
Okay.
And speaking specifically with the view, there's certainly variables that are hard to manage. I mean, do they have a turnstile that counts every turn because of the donations that support the free entry into the parks, if you will, or into the zoo itself? But to your point, as we grow, I think you'll start to see the data evolve into a usable tool. One of the things that I do in the tracking of, I'll use specifically with, and I've got Tori here, every month I look at our crime data and I look to see, do we have spikes occurring in certain areas? I look to that as a tool to say, I need to address this now, because if I don't address it in February, March, there's a spike, and I don't try to find out what the core problem is, come November, I'm gonna have a big problem and I won't know why. So as I look at this data on a month-to-month basis, I'm able to attack whatever problem is out there. And that's really where we're trying to get to as a city and as a department. If we start to see that our numbers are dwindling in a certain area, or they're rising because it's a counter number, then we want to address those as soon as they're happening.
I think you're going to find this is going to be another continuous improvement process.
An iterative process.
And
Yeah.
in the case of the police department, and the reason I asked Chief Smith and Chief Franz at the time to lead this team was because they were very familiar within their own areas about performance measures, and there are a lot of uniform measures that are out there. And I think the human services ones you see there, some are related to either federal or mandates for funding. So if you want the money, you gotta show these numbers,
Right.
and that's why I think transportation also has that, because it's related to transit and they need to report on those things. And UCR, the Uniform Crime Reporting, uniform, they already have benchmarks,
Yes.
which is really great. So they'll be able to get the benchmarks in the police department quicker than, say, some of these other areas. But I think we're finding, as we become more aware of this, that departments have really grown and learned from this process, because it isn't just input measures, it's the outcomes.
It's
and
the logic model.
yeah, and I think it's important that we understand that it's all about, it is about the outcomes. But these are the baby steps that we start with, and I think departments are starting to see more, as they see some of their peer communities, they understand what they can do to improve on what they, ways to collect things and ways to report on it.
And if you would have seen the evolution of the department heads and the departments going through this process, it became an aha moment sometimes for some of them, where they saw, I get this. This is coming together pretty well. And as they're growing along the way, I think the data will get more and more refined for you, and for the community, where they see what we're doing.
Well, and just bring up another one too, community development, for example. You know, one of the things that kind of in my mind came right off was, you know, we've asked over the last couple of years for market analysis in terms of increased property values. And again, here it looks like, you know, they're looking at the number of neighborhood member volunteer hours, inspections corrected, which, you know, that's relative, and then dollars invested, but not necessarily ROI, return on that investment, right? So I just kind of, you know, I realize that it is new, but hopefully we'll start to connect those dots a little more logically.
Sure.
For example, is a museum. I'm sure Brad is keeping track of donations, big ones and large ones, even though it's not here. That data is constantly being gathered. And I would hope this thing we said it's going to evolve. There may be things we discover are not that important. There may be things that surface as being much greater.
Right, and
Exactly.
and
it's a living
remembering
document.
that these are just it's like the iceberg. These are just the tip of the iceberg, and everything underneath. There are a lot more data points that are available that the departments are tracking, and for us individually, internally, we'll be looking at our data. We have a lot of data points. So we're looking at the internal side of things that are specific to us, that allow us to manage the police department consistently on a regular basis. That we don't necessarily, the public doesn't really want to know all the stuff that we try to track, but it helps us as department heads to figure out if we're heading in the right direction. So next steps moving forward. Departments are identifying individuals to input KPI data beginning this month. I happen to have my input person sitting here. She's been doing this for the last year, and she will probably be a big help to the other departments as it relates to figuring out how to do this. Departments will begin collecting data in January of 2019. The public-facing dashboards will be created and should go live after the first quarter of 2019. Staff will develop and implement a public outreach plan in the summer of 2019 to show the community, hey, this is what you have available to you now, this is how you're going to get to it, this is what it can look like, this is what you'll be able to pull data from the city. We can do all this all day long, but if we don't tell the community what we're doing, then we kind of failed the whole community. We'll also integrate new KPIs into the city budget process in the summer of 2019. And then moving forward in the future, we're going to begin benchmarking against other communities that are like this, the city of Oshkosh. So we see how we compare on like benchmarks along the way. Any further questions?
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Just the kind of trickle-down effect, I mean, it's great to have the team. How are we gonna get the buy-in from all the city employees that are really participating in the KPIs?
Well, if you remember through the development process, the team, we did not develop the KPIs for the departments. Those were left specifically to the department heads and their staff. What KPIs, based upon your input to the strategic plan, are important for the public to know about? How do you want to tell your story? If the public said, what is transportation doing, or what is public works doing, what's the story that you want to tell? Because we do a lot of good things here in the city,
Right.
but we don't necessarily always do a good job of saying all the good things that we do in the city. And this is one avenue that we can communicate that message.
Right. Okay, good.
So, Mr. Olaf, then would you envision, not in the State of the City 2019, but 2020, delivering, I guess, part of that report to the community, if you will, through some of these KPIs?
Whether it's state of the city or we do it on an ongoing basis, certainly it's first and foremost, it needs to tie in with the strategic plan and then the budget. Telling the story and maybe doing some comparisons might be good. I might want to tell some of those stories. I try to be a little more future oriented, so I might be able to use them, maybe use the past as a launching pad to the future. Thanks for the suggestion, because I think that we're always looking for different ideas, and you may have given me a State of the City 2020 idea with that suggestion. But I think we do need to use it to tell the story. It may say, this demonstrates an emerging need in the community. Where are we lacking? Because, well, yeah, I think one of the natural fears is that something that is not performing well, can reflect poorly on somebody. And part of the argument that I've tried to use with departments, you can't make a pitch to council for resources unless you want to show areas of improvement. And if you have an area that's not performing, demonstrate that it's not a performance issue from a capability standpoint, could be a resource standpoint. Make your case for additional resources through that vehicle. And so that's the way to tell that story. Or do we reallocate? You know, if we're...
It could be it's no longer a thing. It's no longer a problem. And that it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, right?
Right.
Correct. We love those types of issues where it's like, it's not as big an issue as it used to be, perhaps. And then other things, other areas of emphasis. And that's why, you know, we look at this as an iceberg, because the KPIs are really just the tip. And priorities can change in strategic plan. You may want to move another measure up to be more visible and relevant for discussion. And as things change, you may call up another KPI and relegate that performance measure off of KPIs. We're still going to keep track of it, but will we necessarily be putting it on the front page of the budget type of thing?
Well, I would think an ongoing communication with the citizens is better than once a year. I mean, once a year is a one-shot deal. If we do it, you know, through Oshkosh Media, I think that's the way to get with the community on an ongoing, consistent basis.
I like the opportunity to be able to tell that through the course of the year, because there may be an incident that happens, say, in police, and people may call into question, oh, what's going on? We can demonstrate that may be an isolated incident, because take a look at the UCR. I mean, there may be one incident that gets the attention of the press, and rightfully it should, but if we're telling our story on an ongoing basis, we can demonstrate that, yes, certainly there was something bad that happened here, but overall, we're still addressing it, the numbers are down. And it's all about telling those stories and seeing the opportunity to tell those stories.
In a visual way of presenting the data.
Yeah, and
Yes, because people...
We need pictures with our stories.
There are people that love to read, and there are people that love to have picture books.
Picture books. Well, I think it's very good. A lot of hard work has been put into it already, and it looks like it'll tie well in the strategic plan and moving it forward. So appreciate the work that everybody's done on this.
Thank you.
It's a good tool.
Thank this group of folks who really put a mountain of effort over and above their regular duties. They volunteered for this, and they put a lot of great work in, working not just within their department, but essentially being performance measurement consultants to other departments. So really says a lot about their dedication.
Now, is the thought that that group would change from year to year, so that other departments get that cross exposure too, or would it be the legacy group continues to carry that institutional knowledge forward, or?
Don't give them that idea to jump off ship on us now.
Well, part of this group is that, again, these are up and coming leaders, we think, within the city, and we hope that they expand on their leadership and they start to grow into other areas. And as this evolves, we may or may not have to reconvene the committee, but we hope that our departments are institutionalizing this process for their own needs.
I think Dean said it very well. I think a question was posed earlier. I don't know if it was Councilmember Palmieri or Councilmember Herman about how are people going to become involved. I think because we're just starting this process with everyone and giving them an opportunity to learn with each other and their peers and starting out with these measures, I think it's going to provide an opportunity for them to establish these measures, talk to their supervisors about them. Their supervisors can talk to the employees about it. And then I think once that dialogue starts, I think it'll be I think Councilmember Palmieri talked about the logical process. So it'll kind of be a feedback loop. So when we get together with the council again and we tap the supervisors and we talk department heads to the council members, it won't be just based on our expertise, and it won't be, hey, we think we ought to work on this. We can draw upon that information that we're gathering from the performance indicators, and we can help hopefully improve our strategic planning process overall. And more specifically with this group, we tried not to scare them right away, to tell them that they're going to be involved as we go forward, but I think it's only makes sense, as Chief Smith said, to have them involved and filter in more and more people as people get on board and understand it, feel comfortable with it. So that would be the idea.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We don't have to do this till 5:45.
No, you're free to leave. We will start at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much.